To say that Ohio State ended their 2023 season in dismay would be a big understatement. They finished the year losing to their hated rival, the team up north, for the third straight time, effectively knocking the Buckeyes out of the playoffs. Then, with a load of roster opt-outs, they got embarrassed in their bowl game against Missouri, scoring only 3 points. Finally, a few weeks later, OSU watched the last team on earth they wanted to see hoist the trophy and dance in the confetti. It was those Michigan Wolverines. There was nowhere to run or hide for Ohio State going into 2024. This program and fan base always wants to be seen as a powerhouse in college football, but the facts said otherwise. The Bucks hadn't won a national championship in a decade, and it seemed like they were falling behind other major programs. Today, all of that talk was put to rest after Ryan Day capped off an incredible run through the first ever expanded 12-team CFP just weeks after a catastrophic home loss that caused fans to call for his firing. We've truly never seen anything like this in college football, and I'm going to explain the entire story from start to finish. This video took a lot of effort to compile everything, so it would mean a lot if you guys could hit that like button, subscribe, and do all that. All right, let's get started. Like any great team in CFB nowadays, it starts in the off-season, but not fall camp or spring camp. I mean the transfer portal. Ohio State was returning 15 starters to the 2024 squad, 6 on offense and 9 on defense, but they had holes to fill. And when they did, the Buckeyes put an exclamation point on it. First, 2023 quarterback Kyle McCord was transferring to Syracuse. To many fans' delight, actually. The quarterback market was solid, highlighted by Cam Ward, Dante Moore, Aiden Childs, Dylan Gabriel, and more. But out of all of those guys, according to 24/7 Sports, the Bucks landed the highest-ranked name, 5-star Julian Sayin from Alabama. And no, Sayin was not their starter, but would be a key piece for 2025. Instead, they got a veteran arm, Will Howard from Kansas State, who had played in 34 games during his career, a very safe choice. Although the Buckeyes were returning one of the top running backs in the country, TreVeyon Henderson, that did not stop them from going out in the portal and snatching the best back available, Ole Miss's Quinshon Judkins. This is a decision that left Rebel fans disgusted. Ohio State now clearly boasted the best possible running back room in the nation. Finally, in the midst of Nick Saban retiring from Alabama, the Bucks landed their biggest catch of all, Crimson Tide safety and #1 player in the 2025 portal class, safety Caleb Downs. Downs would surely be the centerpiece and heartbeat of the defense. Alongside a receiver room with veterans like Emeka Egbuka and up-and-coming guys like Carnell Tate, Ohio State was adding a so-called generational talent at wide receiver. 6'3", big-body Jeremiah Smith, who was #1 in the 2024 recruiting class and considered the highest-rated wideouts in modern recruiting history. This roster was speculated to cost around $20 million in NIL compensation. People around the sport were unhappy by this, including Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin. But the Buckeyes weren't done spending. In lieu of offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien opting out of his signing to take the head coaching job at Boston College, OSU hired Chip Kelly to fill that spot. Just to remind you, Kelly was the head coach at UCLA and was taking a downgrade, with Ohio State paying off the rest of his contract. Chip Kelly is known as one of the elite masterminds of play calling in college football, and he was going to be the driver of the well-oiled Buckeyes machine during the fall. As you can tell from the off-season aggression, it was championship or bust for the boys in Columbus. To say we didn't know what kind of team Ohio State was during the beginning of the season is a hyperbole. However, they were not being challenged at all from a talent standpoint. The preseason AP poll had them at #2 with 15 first-place votes, and they were also second in odds to win the Natty. But they started the season playing powerhouses like Akron, Western Michigan, and Marshall. Anyways, while other contenders like Texas, Bama, Georgia were being tested and proving themselves, Ohio State was frankly chilling. Although the Buckeyes cruised through the first 3 games by a combined score of 157-20, how much could you really take from that? One thing was for certain. From the onset, Jeremiah Smith was making a colossal impact. In his first collegiate game, he put up 2 touchdowns on 92 yards receiving, which led the team. This guy wasn't just all hype. He was the real deal. During the first 2 weeks of conference play, the Bucks faced a rebuilding Michigan State team and an average Iowa, winning both games comfortably. Things were looking as expected. Will Howard was solid at quarterback, the rushing attack was balanced, and the defense was suffocating. But it really felt like Ohio State was only going at 70%, saving ammunition in their clip for something special. And that something special was the October 12th matchup in Eugene against number 3 Oregon. Why was Ohio State versus Oregon seen as the game of the year in the regular season? Now, it goes way deeper than the field. Oregon had something to prove as they were the new kids on the block in the Big Ten Conference. They also had that same recent feeling as Ohio State, where they had resources and talent, but could never get to or win that big game. The Ducks loaded up in the transfer portal just as much as the Buckeyes did. In fact, the entire offseason felt like an arms race between these two on who could obtain the most talented roster in the sport. It was Oregon, Ohio State, and everyone else far behind. Dillon Gabriel, Evan Stewart, Jabbar Muhammad. Oregon and Coach Dan Lanning were one of the only teams in the nation who had no fear of Ohio State because they could match up. Everyone was expecting fireworks plus a back-and-forth battle, and that's what we got. But it didn't turn out in the Buckeyes' favor and expose some of their weaknesses. Ohio State's secondary got picked apart by Dillon Gabriel and company, something that we hadn't seen all year. Also, Oregon straight up won the battle in the trenches, which shocked many. Ohio State didn't breathe on Gabriel. Running back Jordan James was stellar, and the Bucs' running game wasn't as effective as they could have been. Will Howard almost played a flawless game under center until the very end, where he mismanaged the clock on a possible game-winning field goal situation, and the new team out west proved they were here to stay. After the loss to Oregon and dropping in the rankings to number 4, Ohio State returned home to face an improved Nebraska Cornhuskers squad, and it was very ugly. The Bucs won a sloppy 21-17 contest, which probably didn't give fans the most hope, but it was clear what was going on. They were looking ahead to next week's game in Happy Valley, another top 5 affair. In recent history, Ohio State has dominated Penn State, winning 9 of the last 10. But early in the game, things were looking scary. The Nittany Lions led 10-0 with 5 minutes left in the first quarter after Will Howard threw a pick 6. But what happened after was a defensive masterclass by the Buckeyes. They only allowed 3 points the rest of the way, getting multiple big stops in the red zone. The offense finally got going, and OSU walked out of State College with a 20-13 win. Absolutely massive. Ohio State was back, and they controlled their destiny to reach the Big Ten title game and get revenge against Oregon. 3 weeks later, the Bucs had no issues against an upstart undefeated Indiana team at home. They held the Hoosiers' high-flying offense to just 153 total yards and gave quarterback Curtis Rourke a day he would want to forget, sacking him 5 separate times. Ohio State was 10-1 and 1 game away from clinching their spot in a rematch with the Ducks. The only thing that stood in front of them? A team that was barely bowl eligible. No one in their right mind could have predicted one of the most embarrassing upsets in recent college football history. From everything I've mentioned in this video, plus the fact that Michigan lost 18 starters from their national championship team and were struggling with their identity all season long, there was no doubt why number 2 Ohio State was favored by 19.5 points at home. But from the beginning of this contest, things seemed off for Ohio State. They weren't playing their game. They weren't using their playmakers on the perimeter enough, with Michigan's elite corner, Will Johnson, on the sideline injured. Their offensive game plan was questionable, and you wonder how Ryan Day lost his last 3 games against the Wolverines? It's simple. Michigan won the physical battle, controlled the clock, and caused the Buckeyes to turn it over. That's exactly what their recipe was again in 2024. The Bucs, with one of the best backfields in the sport, were held to 77 total rush yards, plus Will Howard threw 2 picks. All Sharon Moore needed to do was make it a 4-quarter game, and he knew he had it in the bag. You know how much this rivalry means to both teams. You saw it on the field after it was over, but the attention shifted to something else. Ryan Day had now lost the most important rivalry in college football 4 times in a row, and this one was more inexcusable than ever. A majority of Buckeye fans, local and national media, wanted him fired right on the field the moment the clock hit zeros. They didn't even care about what lay ahead of them, which was the CFP. People felt the legacy of Ohio State's 2024 had a permanent stain on it, and nothing could be done to change it. In the midst of this chaos, would it break them or be all the fuel they needed to make history? If Ohio State wanted to be the first team ever to win 4 straight postseason games to hoist the title, they would need to beat Tennessee in an 8-9 first-round matchup. And they would have to do it at home, in front of a hostile crowd that had not forgotten about the loss a few weeks before. And yes, their own home crowd was hostile. Not to mention, about 40% of the stadium was covered in bright orange from people who made the trip from Knoxville. The early part of the game would tell everything. How would Ohio State respond in an unforgiving atmosphere? But before you could even get settled into your seat or the couch, the ball game was over. The Buckeyes offense was flying up and down the field, and their defense was making life miserable for the Vols' young quarterback Nico Iamaleava. Will Howard threw for over 300 yards with 2 touchdowns, with 100 of them going to the freshman Jeremiah Smith, who scored twice, making his mark in Buckeye history. Every facet of the game, pure domination from OSU, cruising to a 42-17 win. Next up was the quarterfinals, and a rematch they had been hungry for ever since October 12th. After the Bucks won the way they did against Tennessee, the narrative had changed. They were now the slight betting favorite to win the game over undefeated, number 1 seeded Oregon. But of course, everyone was expecting a similar outcome to the first affair, where the score was almost knotted the entire time. But it turned out to be one of the biggest blowouts in Rose Bowl history. Just like in round 1, this contest was over in the first half. If you think Ohio State got out to a fast start against the Vols, imagine double that speed against the Ducks. When TreVeyon Henderson ran it 66 yards to score and make the game 31-0 in the second quarter, goodbye. Keep in mind, this Oregon team was not only undefeated, but Dan Lanning and the Ducks had complete control of every game they played in. And on this day, Ohio State looked like their daddy. Howard was exceptional. Judkins and Henderson combined for almost 200. And it was another legacy performance from Jeremiah Smith, who was unreal with 183 yards receiving and 2 tutties. Ohio State was now the clear favorite to win the national title. The logic of most college football fans was this: okay, Buckeyes, you can beat a good SEC team in Tennessee, but can you beat an elite SEC team in Texas? The Longhorns were the cream of the crop during their first year in the conference, coming off a playoff appearance in 2023. Their head coach, Steve Sarkisian, is a mastermind at game planning to expose teams' weaknesses, and the Texas defense was one of the best. So could they slow OSU down? Yes, they actually did, because this game was a dogfight unlike the previous 2. Through 3 quarters, the game was tied 14-all. Ohio State lacked big plays besides a TreVeyon Henderson 75-yard touchdown catch and run right before the half. The Buckeyes would need to win the ballgame in a way that they were accustomed to early in the year, with their defense. Texas had the ball at the Bucks' 8-yard line and were on the doorstep of tying the game at 21s with about 2 minutes left to go in the fourth. That was until the senior defensive end, Jack Sawyer, made the play of his life, stripping his former roommate Quinn Ewers and running it back 83 yards for a touchdown, a play that will be etched into Buckeye lore forever. Ohio State was now 1 game away from making history, and in order to do so, they would need to beat a familiar foe, who they had a lot in common with. I mentioned how embarrassing the Michigan loss was to Ohio State, and Notre Dame could relate. In week 2, they were upset by an unranked NIU out of the MAC, and if you want more context for that historic game, check out this video I made last week. After the loss, Notre Dame went on a rampage, stomping everyone in their way, proving they were still a top team in the nation. The Irish were not flashy. They wouldn't throw the ball all around the yard and make things look sexy, but they were tough as nails. They could win in the trenches, run the ball down your throat, shut down your offense, and play game-changing special teams. Notre Dame was disciplined under third-year head coach Marcus Freeman. And wait, that name sounds familiar to you Buckeye fans. It's the same guy who played for you in the mid-2000s. How storybook is that? The Natty was the closest of them all, but at one point in the game, it looked like Ohio State had it in the bag, up 31-7. Will Howard was nearly perfect to go along with 2 touchdowns, and the Ohio State defense did enough to fend off the comeback from the Irish. What a game. After what felt like 10 long years, Ohio State reaches the top again in historic fashion. Ryan Day was able to keep this team together through the adversity of the Michigan loss and pulled the toughest playoff run we've ever seen in the sport during an experimental 12-team format. Not a penny of that $20 million went to waste. You're probably wondering how I got this video up so fast, and I pre-recorded it, and it's my revenge from last year because I did a video for Washington, and Washington lost. I was distraught. I was almost crying, y'all. I was gonna be the first one to post. It was gonna be so great. I was gonna gain so many subs. This back when my channel was tiny, and no, it didn't happen. So this is my revenge. Shout out to you, Ryan Day. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. I've been Saturday Shenanigans, your home for unfiltered college football content, and I'll see you guys soon.